So let's finish this up by doing ancient man and dinosaurs. The first thing we just have to deal with ever so briefly is the evolution of man, because this is a real hang-up place for a lot of people. So let me just point out that in this evolutionary tree of human beings, even the evolutionary scientists will no longer tell you we came from apes. And the reason they will not tell you we came from apes is because they know the scientific evidence connecting us with apes doesn't exist. So what they will tell you is that we come from a common ancestor, because that's just nebulous enough that you can't just grab it and put your finger on it, that they can get away with it. So they'll tell you we came from a common ancestor with the apes. Now the reason they'll tell you that, and once again in the Smithsonian Institution, see the lemur turning into a human being. We're still taught this stuff even though the evidence doesn't exist. This is from the cover of Richard Leakey's book and Origins, and they found human footprints, fully human footprints, but because of when they dated those footprints, they drew that lady to look like an ape person. And it was strictly by when they dated the footprints. Let's be honest, can you tell what somebody looked like from their footprints? No, absolutely not. And so there's a lot of artistic license that goes into this whole evolution of man thing. This is the pieces of the jawbone that they found of Ramapithecus, which is one of the hominids that is supposed to lead to the evolution of human beings. That is the picture they drew from the piece of jawbone. There is a lot of artistic license going in here. And actually, as far back as 1981, Science Digest took Ramapithecus completely off the human evolution because it was found to be the jaw of a gibbon, which is a giant ape. So it's got nothing to do with human evolution. One of the most famous ones that is put on the line for human evolution is Dr. Johansson's Lucy. And Lucy, the brown parts are actually what they found of Lucy. So let me show you here. Lucy is the most articulated version. In other words, we have more pieces of Lucy than any other thing that's going on the line for human evolution. Lucy is 3 foot 6 inches tall, and everything about Lucy is totally ape-like. The reason that she's such a find is because she's supposed to walk upright. And this lower leg is supposed to allow her to walk upright. The trick is the people that actually saw the fossil said that this looked very different than the rest of it. And Dr. Johansson said, yes, well, I found it 180 meters away and 60 meters lower in the dirt. So immediately my little pea brain goes, so what train hit Lucy to knock her leg that far away, okay? And when he was asked how he felt like he could justify putting that together, he said, well, he thought it came from a similar species and therefore he felt justified in putting it together. You got to remember, researchers only make their living if people think they're doing something, and so this can be very, very important. I want you to understand, though, that if you took every human evolution fossil on planet Earth, including all of this one, every piece that exists on the whole planet, it would not fill your dining room table at home. The evidence doesn't exist for human evolution. And that's actually why they no longer say we evolved from apes. They say we evolved from a common ancestor, because they know that the evidence actually just doesn't exist. Now, the evolutionists will tell you that Neanderthal man has nothing to do with human evolution at all. And that's because they know that Neanderthal man has a larger brain space than normal people. It would be evolution in reverse. But then they go on to say these weren't really human beings, and yet they intermarried with people. We know that. And Neanderthals actually were just a group of people with a different skull shape. They were very artistic. They had musical instruments that are very similar to the musical instruments, the tonal qualities that we use today. And one was actually found buried in a coat of mail. He was a knight. And another Neanderthal was found, he had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head. Well, guns have only been around the last couple hundred years, so Neanderthals are still around. We put them in business suits and put them in New York, and you know, it's just a person with a different skull shape. It really is. And actually, it's interesting to me, this is an 1898 photograph of Chief Wolfrobe of the Cheyenne Nation, and yet if they found his skull, he's got a forward jutting jaw, he's got the heavy brow, the sloping forehead. He would be a Neanderthal. But that's just a person that Jesus died for. So I want to make it very clear that the Neanderthals were just people. And then back in the 1920s, it was illegal to teach evolution in the school system. And so to get it into the school system, they had the Scopes trials. The evidence for evolution that was used in the Scopes trials was Nebraska Man. Nebraska Man was drawn from one tooth. One tooth. And that tooth ended up being a tooth from an extinct pig. And so they drew all of that and made that whole case from a pig's tooth. What I'm trying to say to you is that the evidence is very politically interpreted to be what people want it to be. And so basically there's no evidence that man evolved from anything else. And I like how Mark Twain says it best. He says, there's something fascinating about science. One gets such a wholesale return of conjecture out of such a trifling investment of facts. And I definitely agree with him there. A lot of interpretation going on. And I just want to throw this one out because sometimes you'll see this on the Discovery Channel or something else. These are 2 fossil sandal footprints. And these are dated at some ridiculous, like 100 million years old. But everybody knows man has only been here the last million or 2 years. So 100 million years ago, there were no people on Earth if the evolutionists were correct. How do they know? Good girl, Missy. I was just going there. Because right here, the guy that stepped on this, he stepped on a baby trilobite. So there's an index fossil in the fossil of a sandal print. And they date this by the index fossil. So this is proof that spacemen were here. I just want you to understand this is how this is interpreted. This is proof that spacemen were here because everybody know that people weren't here when trilobites were here. So obviously spacemen had to make these footprints. That's the only explanation they can come up with. Remember I told you that when Francis Crick looked at the DNA molecule and he said, well, it must have come here from outer space. The fallback for the evolutionists is to blame it on outer space. I want you to be very clear on that. And if you'll start listening, you'll start hearing it. And Amanda asked a really good question during the break. She goes, well, what about aliens? And that is really a quite common question. And it's a good question. And I'm only going to give you my opinion because that's all I can do because the Bible doesn't speak to it directly. Okay? So you take my opinion or leave it. It's up to you, whatever you want. I don't believe in aliens because I believe that the whole concept of aliens is based upon evolution, and I don't believe in evolution. The idea of aliens is that if life evolved here, then life must have evolved someplace else too. That's the idea. The problem with that spiritually is that that would mean Jesus would have had to go and die for them too, and that I have issues with. But that's not really the biggest issue for me. I have been saying for years that I think people really do see aliens that have been abducted and stuff like that. I think it's demonic activity. I think that there are actually demons that use the ploy of aliens to actually cause people great distress and even abduct them. And I was telling Amanda that I spoke in Cocoa Beach area once and somebody asked that question and I gave my answer the best I could. I had 2 guys come up to me after the talk and their whole ministry was to alien abductees. That's all they did was minister to alien abductees. And they said they just wanted to give me some supporting evidence that the one thing that they had found with every alien abductee that they'd talked to was that at the name of Jesus Christ, the abduction stopped. And they were back where they started.
Don't you think they were just schizophrenics? With all due respect.
No, I appreciate that, Missy. I appreciate that because I have friends that are schizophrenic, so I really understand schizophrenia. And no, I think there's demonic activity that I know you're a young Christian. You be in the body for a while. You're going to hear stories that are going to curl your hair.
Like I know like demons could possess us.
It's
but
not
a
just
demon
that.
does not have a body in itself.
No, absolutely not. But they can present themselves like people. They can present themselves like people. And so just like angels can present themselves like people, right?
Because demons are fallen angels.
Demons are fallen angels, and real angels exist, and they present themselves as people, and then they can disappear. And okay, I'll give you one story on that. Heard from Chuck Colson years ago, and he's with the Lord now. But there was somebody, a girl, that was like in New York City, and she was walking home and had to go through a bad neighborhood, and she saw this really scary looking guy that she had to go by, and she was praying like crazy, please Lord protect me, please Lord protect me, and she managed to get home. He left her alone. She gets home, she turns on the TV, and on the TV, somebody got murdered right on that corner, and they said, if you have any information on anybody that was there, please contact us. So she calls the police station. This is a true story. She goes down to the police station, and she identifies the guy, and it's the same guy. And so they asked the guy, why did you not attack her? And he said, because the two big guys that were on either side of her. She was alone, okay? Now that's just one story. I have stories within my family that angels showed themselves, and then when you turn around to say thank you, the person is gone. All right? So Missy, that's why I can understand as a young Christian why you look at this and go, that's just crazy. But the demons are able to manifest themselves just like regular angels are able to manifest themselves. And so that's why I believe that. But you don't have to believe any of that, and it's not in the Bible about the alien thing, so it's okay. I just want to throw that out there because some people question about that, okay? So let's look at a creation perspective of man. When God created man, he created him in his own image, so Adam had to be brilliant. Think about it. And I don't know, do you want scripture? Genesis, go back to Genesis and look. It says these are the books of Adam, or these are the written records of Adam. Adam could read and write. All right, we know that because the scripture tells us so. So, and let's be honest, when God created man, they lived an average of 900 years. You'd have to try to be stupid in 900 years, wouldn't you? You'd have 100 years to study medicine, 100 years to study music, 100 years to study architecture, 100 years to study cooking. You know what I'm saying? You'd really have to try to be dumb if you were 900 years old. And so ancient man should have been pretty smart. Now we already said they got on and off the ark. Where they landed was the mountains of Ararat, which is right above the Fertile Crescent and Mesopotamia. Now those of you who remember your schoolwork, that's where they always tell us that civilization started was in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. Guess why? Because the ark landed just above it and it was right down the hill. And people are generally lazy, right? So if it looked good, they go, hey, this looks good, let's stay here. Also, I want you to be aware, we have no idea where Eden was. Eden is like a mile deep under sedimentary rock somewhere that was erased and redeposited. So when you see books, including Christian books, that tell you, well, it's got to be over here because the Euphrates River is here, it's not the same Euphrates River. Go read your Bible in Genesis and get the description of the Euphrates River. Then look at the current Euphrates River. It's not the same river. And so why did they name it the same? Because people do stuff like that. They came here from England and they go, oh, looks like Hampshire, let's call it New Hampshire. Looks like York, let's call it New York. People do stuff like that. So when it reminded them of stuff that they had seen before, they actually just named it after it. But look at your Bible and then look at the ones that exist now. They are not the same. I just want you to be aware of that. So they came down the mountain, Fertile Crescent. They get there. They're told that they're supposed to repopulate the planet. But there's a Nimrod in every crowd. And he goes, no, man, let's stay here. Let's hang out. Let's build a pyramid, the Tower of Babel. Let's build this pyramidal ziggurat is what it's called, type structure, and we will worship the stars. That's what a lot of people think the actual Hebrew meant, that they were going to try to worship the stars. And God says, no, we're not playing this game again. We're just not doing this. He says, so we're going to make it so you guys got to scatter. So one day they all go to work and nobody can understand each other. Your best friend you can't talk to. That would be very upsetting in my opinion. But when you went home, you could understand your family because God's all about family, isn't he? And so as those family groups moved out at the Tower of Babel, you literally see them during the Ice Age, approximately 250 to 300 years after the flood was when the Tower of Babel occurred. That is like the peak of the Ice Age. So sea level was down. They could literally walk into every continent of the world. The interesting thing is though, linguists, people that study language, will tell you that from the Tower of Babel, there were between 9 and 20 original family groups that went out because all of the languages that exist today can be gone back to one of these original languages that came out of the Tower of Babel. And it's very interesting because these are the language groups and then they fan out at the top. And so you get these slight variations, but they came from the original same groups. So they can actually look at this and see this in the languages. Yes, ma'am?
What's the purest language? What is it? Hebrew.
I was going to say Hebrew. That's where I would go. But I have a dear friend that's probably with the Lord now, and she wrote a book called Adam and His Kin. And she said the original language was Edenese, which I thought was very cool. And she thinks it was very similar to ancient Hebrew. So, but that's a good question. I'm not sure. Go a step further. What color were Adam and Eve?
One black, one white.
I'll bet you they were dirt colored myself, because they were made from dirt. If you think about it. But that's good. Actually, I don't think the white boys showed up till much later. Let me tell you why. Okay. Everybody spread out after the Tower of Babel. They could come down into the United States and into the Americas. They could actually have moved very slowly so that their children and everything could keep up, and within 1 year they could literally migrate all over the planet if they just even went very slowly and moved at a progressive rate. So people were able to go around to the different parts of the world. Now, you guys asked this, and this is definitely important. So where do we get all the different races? You're just seeing family groups. As these family groups moved out, originally, some of those family groups went north. And those people, I can't show you yet because I don't have those pictures. Those people that went north were Japheth's people, actually. The Bible tells us which way they went. Japheth's people went north. Japheth is one of the 3 sons of Noah, okay? His people went north. What did they run into? They ran into glaciers. So where would you want to get your family out of the cold? Maybe a cave? So we see those people groups in that area in caves at that time because it was a way to get out of the cold. Let's say that within that family group, they had from the darkest skinned people to the fairest skinned people within the family group, because they would have probably had the information for all the different colors within the human genome. Which kids would have survived to reproduce? Darker skinned people don't do as well, and there's not as much sunlight because they don't produce enough folic acid and they don't get as fertile, and therefore the fair skinned people were naturally selected for within that population. And what kind of people groups do you think of in Northern Europe? Vikings, right? These tall, pale people, correct? Okay, what about the kids that went south? Well, let's see. Japheth went this way, Shem went this way, and Ham's people went this way. Ham's people would have had fair-skinned people and dark-skinned people too. Which kids would have done well in the equatorial regions? The darker skinned people. Because the fairer skinned people actually would have been selected against because they're too fair, they'd have gotten melanoma and other problems, and therefore the darker skinned kids would have been naturally selected for within those populations. Do you see how you can get these different ones?
It's survival of the fittest.
It actually is. And let me be very clear, because I teach evolution to my biology students. Survival of the fittest is true, but it's always a winnowing out of a population. It never adds information to a population. It literally takes away from a population because things are dying. So they're not there to share that genetic information anymore. So it's definitely survival of the fittest when it comes to this. And then people tend to be tribal, don't they? When you're talking about family groups, we still see this happening in Africa and places like that where they're killing each other off. People tend to stay in their family groups and intermarry within their family groups. So that's where you would see a lot of these things come from. Now, just to show you that you can get all the different colors just from normal everyday people, these 2 girls are twins. And I love this. And you want to see some more? Those girls are twins. Okay, what does it take to have all the different variations within the human genome color-wise? And I've read that there's 9 different color types within the human genome as far as skin. All it takes is 1 black and 1 white grandparent. If you have 1 black and 1 white grandparent on either side, you can get all 9 color types right there within the grandchildren of that family. And so it's really easy. Almond eyes is just an eye shape. We've all got the exact same pigment. It's melanin. It's just how much of it you express. So what you're seeing here is familial traits. So there are no races. There is the mankind. There is the humankind, and there's variation within kind like we saw before, but it's only one kind. So hopefully I explained that for you. And here I told you about Japheth going up, Shem's people this way, Ham's people this way. Okay. Japheth's people that went north would have run into these glaciers. All right, now let's do something else. Ancient man should have been brilliant. If Adam was brilliant and people used to live an average of 900 years, then even at the time of the Tower of Babel, we should see ancient man doing incredible things because he wasn't a brutish ape. They came from people that were made in the image of God that had a lot of technology. Let me just give you a few. These are called op art, out of place artifacts. They're out of place because everybody knows ancient man was stupid and brutish and he couldn't do these things. Okay, and they will frequently, the evolutionists will frequently tell you, spacemen obviously were here or these people couldn't have done this stuff. So if you watch certain TV shows, they'll tell you this is proof that spacemen were here because of this. Okay, this is a map. This is the Piri-Reis map. This map was last copied in 1513. This map was on gazelle skins. This map has accurate longitudes and latitudes. Now, if you know your history, you should know that shouldn't be. because we didn't have accurate longitudes and latitudes till way, way after this. And this was copied from maps from before the time of Christ. Not only that, but this map also shows you the portrayal of Africa's shoreline and other places, and it's absolutely accurate. Now this map, okay, there you go, South America and oh, and it shows the land bridge. That's for me, because I couldn't remember. It shows the land bridge between South America and Antarctica on this map. When could they possibly have mapped that they would see the land bridge between Antarctica and South America? During the Ice Age, right? During the Ice Age. It had to be mapped during the Ice Age. This map is used on certain stations on the TV to tell you spacemen were here, because otherwise, how could man have ever done that? Okay, this is another one that's a lot of fun. This is the Arontius Phinehas map, which is from 1531. This map is cool because this map, it shows the land bridge between Antarctica and South America too, but this is what's so cool about this. This map shows you where the mountain ranges are in Antarctica, and today those mountain ranges are over a mile deep under glaciers. We have only known that this map was accurate since the 1950s, when we got radar that they could find where the mountain ranges are, and they figured out that this map is actually accurate. And this is an ancient map also. This one is Arontius Phinehas. If you will go on those websites I told you, like Answers in Genesis and stuff, look up Ancient Man, and you'll get a lot of these kind of things that'll come up. This is a coral encrusted, it's called an analog computer. It doesn't have a mouse, doesn't have a monitor. But this is the kind of computer that we used on our battleships to do the firing arrangements for the 16-inch guns up until recently. So it's a type of computer that requires differential gears and stuff. Well, the trick is this is a coral-encrusted computer that was found in a shipwreck in the Aegean Sea from 62 BC. So they had computer devices, analog computer devices, before the time of Christ. Now, why would they have these things? Probably to do cartography, probably to make maps and figure out latitudes and longitudes and stuff like that. One way or another, this was a find, and it was brought up, and nobody figured out what it was until years later, when somebody had the technology to look underneath the coral without ripping it apart, and they freaked when they saw what was under there, especially because it was from 62 BC.
There's a thing on Netflix about that piece right there, the Natural Wonders.
There you go.
Ness and stuff.
Cool.
Netflix.
Yeah, and they can probably even say the place in Greece. I have trouble with it, so you guys will notice I try to stay away from things I can't pronounce. Thank you. When the people moved out from the Tower of Babel, think about if your family, all of a sudden, your extended family, all of a sudden got pushed out and you couldn't communicate with anybody else. Some of your family members are probably really good, like survivalists and stuff like that. And others, probably wimpy, right? Well, as each family group moved out, that was probably their situation too. Some people would be really good at building things and take the information with them, and other people wouldn't. That's just how it is. Well, apparently, they all took with them this idea of how to make pyramids, because we see pyramids on all 6 continents that people live in, and we even have them right here in South Florida, down in Everglades City. There are shell pyramids that they have found and they're working on down there. So pyramidal type structures was this shared by all of the people that went all different directions. This is cool. This is down in South America, and this is an Incan Wall, was built thousands of years ago by the Inca. They actually cut out these weird stones and carried them great distances to build this wall. Some of the stones in this wall weigh 100 tons, 100 metric tons. And the trick is this. They have been there for thousands of years. Look at the size of some of these rocks. They have been there for thousands of years. There is no mortar between these rocks. They have gone through multiple earthquakes, and they are still so perfectly cut and moved into place that you can't slide a piece of paper between them. These people knew what they were doing, don't they? And the guys that built the ancient temple of Baalbek in Lebanon, the foundation stones of this thing to give you scale, well, one actually was left in the quarry that wasn't used. It's 14 by 16 by 66 feet long and just weighs an incredible amount. And we still don't have equipment today that could move it up the hill to build that temple, and yet they quarried these out at this place and carried them up the hill and built the ancient Temple of Baalbek in Lebanon. This is an observatory in South America, Mexico. The Mayans actually observed the stars. Now get this, they had the solar day calculated to within 1/10,000th of what we have it calculated at today. That's how accurate they were. Yeah, they even figured out the synodic period of Venus, which is how we see the different phases of Venus and all that. It's just super accurate stuff that the Mayans did. And believe it or not, people apparently were able to fly long before the Wright brothers. This is found from a 1,000-plus-year-old grave in South America. This is giving you scale. When they found these, they originally thought that they were just insect models until, there's a bunch of them, until a German Second World War pilot took a look at it and goes, wait a minute, guys, there's avions, there's rudders. That's a plane. And he even said which plane he thought it looked similar to. So the point is that ancient man apparently knew something about flying, but it wasn't just in South America. In the late 1800s, before people were flying, they found in an Egyptian tomb that was opened up, so it was thousands of years old, they found this 7-inch long model because nobody knew what a plane looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They wrote on the box, wooden bird carving, and they put it in a box and put it away. Well, somebody pulled it out of the box about 50, 60 years later in Cairo at the museum, and they looked at it and they go, that's no bird, that's a plane. And so they got a whole committee together to study this little couple thousand-year-old plane, and what they said was it has the same wing structure of the supersonic Concorde airplane when it was flying back and forth between us and Europe. Everything about it was so efficient that they said that if it was a full-size plane, it could have carried a very heavy payload at just 45 miles an hour because it is so well designed. And so ancient man knew how to fly. Now there are other evidences to that extent too, but apparently they did. Let's just go on and do dinosaurs. So let's do Jehovah's Park versus Jurassic Park. Okay, now, first off, what do we know about the dinosaurs? We have to look at their fossils to figure out things about the dinosaurs because we can't just go into the swamp and poke them and prod them and observe them. So we have to interpret their fossils. And the sad part about that is the fossils don't come out with little books attached to them telling us the information about them. No, actually all they tell us is I'm dead. And from there, they actually have to be interpreted. And depending on whether you believe the Bible or whether you believe secular history, you're going to get two very different views on dinosaurs. Most Christians have no idea how dinosaurs fit into their Bible, which is very sad because God actually tells us in the book of Job that they were made so that man would look at them and give God glory. You know, oh yeah, I'm going to give you some references. Anyway, so let's start by looking at Jehovah's Park, how God worked these in. And so God tells us in Genesis that God created everything in 6 real days, 6,000 years ago. The water and winged critters were created on the 5th day, 6,000 years ago. So, and those aren't really dinosaurs because dinosaurs are 4-legged land dragons with a particular type of hip. But most of the time when you talk about dinosaurs, or if you watch Jurassic Park, they include the flying pterosaurs and they also include the water reptiles. So we'll group them all in together in what we're going to talk about, but they really aren't dinosaurs by definition. So the land ones were made on the 6th day, 6,000 years ago. The winged and water ones were on the 5th day, 6,000 years ago. And they were all vegetarians originally, because I know Missy was asking, well, what about the T-Rexes and who fed those on the ark, which is a really good question. Originally, everything was vegetarian from what the scripture tells us, and it was after the flood that things started to eat meat on a regular basis. So they could have lived on vegetable products during the year that they were in the ark. The next question we have to ask is, how did you get them in the ark if they were so huge? Well, you have to remember that the ark was very, very large, and we already discussed that it's huge, but you also have to remember they didn't have to take the biggest, oldest dinosaurs. As a matter of fact, I personally believe they took teenage dinosaurs on the ark because the animals they took on the ark had to have a reproductive lifespan afterwards. That was the idea. So young, healthy dinosaurs would have had a longer reproductive life. They would have been stronger to get through the trauma that they were going to go through. And let's be honest, everybody knows that teenagers hibernate better than any other age group, so they'd have been easier to take care of, right? Yeah, okay. And so young, healthy dinosaurs would have fit. And the largest dinosaur egg that's ever been found is only 18 inches long. So the young, healthy ones would have fit very nicely. You didn't have to take the biggest, oldest ones you can find. That's how the dinosaurs could have fit on the ark. And once again, most of the animals probably hibernated through at least the first 40 days because it was so traumatic. And most animals have the ability to hunker down and just kind of go into stasis while they're waiting to get through a trauma. And this was definitely a trauma. Okay, so we already talked about that. As the sediments were laid down, the dinosaurs that had been killed during the flood would get buried, and then when the mountains were pushed up and erosion would occur, the dinosaur fossils would become exposed, and once they became exposed, then people would be able to find them. This is a fossil Ichthyosaur. This is a marine reptile, and some of these got 28, 30 plus feet long. She was buried very rapidly. And the reason I can say that and say she's a she is she has her baby still hanging out of her birth canal. There is a baby Ichthyosaur. Here's its beak, its eye, there's its little body. She was buried so quickly, the baby didn't even have time to finish coming out. So this is good evidence for catastrophic burial, that this must have been buried very, very quickly. We find fossil, not fully fossilized dinosaur skin. And you've already heard about that now, that there's all sorts of evidences of non-fossilized parts of these dinosaurs that are being dated at 70 million years old. Yes, Beth?
Couldn't she have just died during childbirth?
Yes, but then she'd have rotted. It would have, and if she wasn't buried, that's a good question, Beth. If she wasn't buried, the baby would have finished coming out, and then they would have been buried. That's why it's really significant that it's exactly where you see it. Yes, ma'am?
Can like that one with the baby coming out and the fish with the food and stuff be dated to the same time?
I would say it's dated to the flood. Yeah, they're definitely in the flood
So
layers.
Same time.
Yes, basically the same time. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Okay, good questions. Very good questions. Oh, you know what's cool about this? So you can get an idea of what the reptile's skin looked like. Think about it, because we only have the fossils, so you really can't get a full view of what the dinosaurs might have been like, but this actually shows you what the skin might have looked like. Now, I already told you that we've actually found osteocytes and stretchy blood vessels and stuff that came out of T-Rexes, and why would we see that? Well, because they didn't die millions of years ago, they died fairly recently. Remember, those that made it through the flood and were in different places during the Ice Age. When the Ice Age ended and the water was cut off, a lot of them would have become extinct in certain places. But that wasn't true everywhere. Now, the reason I know the dinosaurs got on and off Noah's Ark is because my Bible tells me so. Yeah, because that's the only thing I really know in life is what the Bible tells me. And if you go to Job 40, starting at the 15th verse and going through the 24th verse, you will read about Behemoth. And a lot of the footnotes in some of these Bibles will try to tell you that Behemoth was an elephant or a hippo. Behemoth had a tail like a cedar tree. Oh, I'm out of time, so hang on. I'm going to come back to that. Why don't we see the word dinosaur in the Bible? Because nobody used the word dinosaur until 1841. That was the first time it was ever used. So before that, they had other names. And in the Bible, once again, we have Behemoth, we have Leviathan, and in other cultures, we have Grendel, we have all these different names that people actually call Loch Ness Monster. We have all these other names that people called these because nobody had ever heard of a dinosaur. And so dragon was a very common name for dinosaurs up until recently, because let's be honest, if a T-Rex chased you home, you'd say, a dragon chased me home, right? And so it was a good name for it. Now, once again, back to Behemoth. Behemoth, there's Behemoth. Behemoth had a tail like a cedar tree. They were coveted in the ancient world. They went great distances to get cedar trees because of their size and the type they are. And therefore, when the Bible tells us Behemoth had a tail like a cedar tree, and then some of your footnotes try to tell you that it was an elephant or a hippo, I want you to think about the tail on an elephant or a hippo and tell me, is that a tail like a cedar tree?
Well, could it have been
No.
an alligator? Think about their tail and that they're kind of like the dinosaurs.
I want you to go home and read it, and you'll know it can't be an alligator.
Alright.
Okay? Oh, and I never finished this. Dinosaurs were four-legged land dragons that had one of two special hips that had caused them to walk with their body weight up over their legs like a cow and a horse, not splayed down here like an alligator or a regular lizard today. Does that make sense? So they didn't have to be huge. There were dinosaurs that were this big. They walked up like chickens. Okay, you see them on Jurassic Park or, you know, Jurassic World and all that stuff. So they didn't have to be huge, but they had to have one or two special kind of hips that helped them to walk up over their legs like a cow or a horse does. Okay, so they had, I would say, more mobility than, you know, alligators, crocodiles, and the lizards that we see that are represented by those. Okay, so behemoth definitely could not have been, oh, and there are actually some Bibles in the kids' footnotes. Can you tell how hard I am to buy Bibles for? You know, when people gave my kids Bible books, I'd be looking through them going, well, this is heresy. We're not showing the kid that, you know. And my husband's like, my mother bought that. I don't care. You know, my poor husband has to put up with me all this time. But some of these books will actually try to tell you that behemoth was an elephant, and the cedar tree tail is supposed to be describing the nose of an elephant. And I don't know about you, but I find it absolutely offensive that God Almighty doesn't know the difference between a nose and a tail. Who would say that? So it's exactly what God said it was. And have some fun. When you go home, Missy, and you read Job 40, starting at the 15th verse, and go to the end of this chapter, it will give you information about a living, breathing, brontosaurus-type dinosaur, what he was like with the other animals, where he hung out, etc., because it's an eyewitness account, okay? And the reason it's given there is God is saying to Job, look, what I made. Glorify me. That's really what he was saying. And let's be honest. If this guy walked by you and didn't step on you, you might stop and say, praise the Lord, right? I mean, serious stuff. So that would definitely get our attention. Now, you want to have some fun? Go to the next chapter. Job 41 talks about the fire-breathing Leviathan, which were probably mosasaurs, maybe. I don't know. But, and I don't know if this is what he looked like. That was just the biggest, ugliest thing I could come up with, okay? But the point is, there really were fire-breathing dragons. It wasn't just that people were all drunk and telling stories, etc. There really were fire-breathing dragons. We know that because they're in the Bible. There are still fire-blowing bugs. They're called Bombardier Beetles, and they still blow 200 degrees Fahrenheit out their back end. They got little swivel exhaust pipes that they can even shoot this way. I mean, they're incredible. So if they're still fire-blowing bugs, there's no problem with there being fire-breathing dragons. And so you can get a really good description, real-life description in Job 41 of a fire-breathing dragon. They really did exist.
I want to see this bug.
The bug. Go on online and look up the Bombardier Beetle. It's B-O-M-B, a deer. It's like the word bomb. Anyway, yes, I'll get with you after. Bombardier beetles. So, we should see dinosaurs mentioned in the rest of the Bible, not in the word dinosaur, but in whatever the word the Bible used for it. And the Bible actually used the word tannin or tannim. And the best translation for those two words, which are in the Old Testament over about 21 times, is dragons. That is the dragon or monster. When you see dragons in the New Testament, it's usually referring to Satan. But in the Old Testament, it's actually a zoological description of a creature. And so, and in your New International Version, the word tannin or tannim in the Old Testament is translated to jackal. And so when you see the word jackal in the New International Version, you're probably actually looking at the description of a dragon, of a dinosaur. Now you may question like I did, well, why would they call that a jackal? Because a jackal looks like a dog. Well, it's because the word tannin actually has something to do with a root word that has something to do with howling. And because they thought dogs howl, they made it a jackal. But in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, which is the original Webster's Dictionary, oh, you can have so much fun with that dictionary, it actually talks about certain reptiles still having a singing voice because of their howl. So there are reptiles that can howl very nicely. That's not a problem. Now, do we see these in certain places in our Bible? Well, when Moses and Aaron showed up in front of Pharaoh and they threw down Aaron's rod, it did not turn into a snake. It turned into a tannin or a tannim. It turned into a dragon. And then Pharaoh's magicians threw down their rods. They turned into dragons. And then God's dragon was bigger and badder and it ate Pharaoh's guys' dragons. Trick is, different Hebrew word than the word for snake, which is found in Genesis 3, where the fall is. Different Hebrew word. At this point in seminars, I have had pastors leave and then come back smiling because they went and checked. Okay, and I just think it's funny. Different Hebrew words. So this is actually a better story with the dragon, isn't it? It really is. And we see them once again in several other places in the Old Testament. But if dinosaurs really got on and off Noah's Ark, you would think other people groups would remember dinosaurs, wouldn't you? And they do. The one longest history of any one nation in the world is China. And China actually does remember them, the dragons. And China actually has the dragon as one of their 12 houses, their astrological houses. And all of the others are living creatures. The dragon is just an extinct creature that they put in there. Now see, you know, I'm a creation scientist. When I go to a Chinese restaurant, I look at that, and then I look at the stylized lions and compare it to what a real lion looks like, and then I try to imagine what this maybe really looked like.
Why do you think God did away with them?
I don't think God did away with them. I think, well, we're going to go there. We're going to go there. Okay, that's a good question. I'll get there in just a sec, I promise, Missy. Okay, so the Chinese actually record in their history that right after the flood, the emperor actually had one guy that they paid to breed him dragons that used to pull his chariot when he was doing a parade. He was pulled by dragons. The Chinese record how they had a royal dragon, which was a purple dragon, and it had a certain number of toes, and the people's common dragon had a different number of toes, and the archaeologists have backed up now that these different dragons had different numbers of toes. Historically, the royal dragon, they used its saliva to make perfume and ink and other things. So historically, it's actually recorded that the way they would get the dragon saliva is they would wave roasted sparrows in front of its nose, and the dragon would drool, and they would collect the drool. I mean, just all sorts of whack stuff that you can find in the Chinese history. The first royal dragon feeder was appointed in 1611 BC. There were royal dragon feeders up to fairly recently to keep the dragons out of their shrines, because the dragons would get in and they put their sacrifices out for Buddha, and the dragons would get in there and eat the food. So they had people that would feed the dragons to keep them out. And dragons have been found up to recently.
What does recently mean?
I'm sorry?
What does recently mean in timing?
Last 100 years. Oh, yeah. Last 100 years. And if you I wrote a book on this, and it's been a long time, so I don't remember everything, but I wrote a book called Jehovah's Park versus Jurassic Park, which is out of print. I got to make it an ebook or something. But I had so much fun, because you can get stuff within the last 300 years that just blows you away, that it's very common knowledge that these things were around even recently. I mean, like the flying reptiles, up until the early 1900s, people in Great Britain said they're worse than hen houses, foxes in the hen house. And so they would kill them. And they gave beautiful descriptions of the pterosaurs that were in Great Britain. They had black, oily skin that shone all the colors of a rainbow. Now, Floridians, I don't know how much Florida reptiles you know, but that says to me indigo snake, or it says skink. It had skin like a skink or an indigo snake. So when you get these descriptions, it's so cool. And this is like less than 100 years ago. Yes, Beth?
Do you think there's any dinosaurs still around?
Yes, we're getting there. Good question. All right, so if you look in the Chinese English dictionary, it actually tells you the word dragon is dragon, imperial name, or a huge extinct reptile dinosaur. So they're aware that the word dragon actually just means dinosaur. Now, when I wrote my book, I found something out. This was before the internet, so it was really hard to write the book because I had to do everything at the library and by hand. And it's much easier now. And when I wrote the book, I found 3 different references to the fact that dragons and elephants were mortal enemies. And I did not find that in any other book. It was like God was showing me this. And one of the references is Pliny the Elder, who was like the first guy that ever wrote an ancient encyclopedia. Pliny the Elder tells us in his history, Africa produces elephants, but it's India that produces the largest, as well as the dragon, which is perpetually at war with elephants. And then the Ethiopian word for dragon actually means elephant killer. And then in Europe, they found a cave etching in a Neanderthal cave, and this is what it is. It's a dragon headbutting a mammoth. And so I found all three of these references that dinosaurs and elephants used to not get along very well. Now that the internet exists, I found a whole bunch more. In Charles the Bald's first Bible, which was around 846 AD, we have an elephant fighting with a dragon. This is another one from the Middle Ages with an elephant fighting a dragon, only this time the elephant's winning. We have another one with an elephant fighting a dragon. So apparently elephants and dragons didn't get along, and we have a lot of references to show us that from people that saw them not get along. T-Rex was around up until recently. Beowulf, nothing like the movie at all, okay? Beowulf was the name of a man who was a Swedish king. He actually lived. He wasn't a king originally because he was like the second or third son. So what did he get to do? He got to go around and be a dragon killer while his brother was busy being the king. And then when his brother got knocked off for whatever reason, he had to go back and serve. But until then, he was known as the great dragon fighter because that's what he got to do. And the Grendel was what this T-Rex was called. The reason I say it's a T-Rex, it was described as walking upright like a man, having huge jaws, and having two little claws for arms. That is a T-Rex. And so it talks about the Grendel actually eating multiple Danish warriors. And so Beowulf was their hero because he went in and he got up under its jaws and he took its little arm and he compound fractured it and it went back to its lair and died. Now, interestingly, that was apparently a pretty well-known technique because from an ancient Babylonian seal, you see a man taking off the arm of a theropod dinosaur, which is an upright walking dinosaur. So apparently that was pretty well known. Now, I want to say one more thing before we leave Beowulf. Beowulf killed a lot of dragons. He died in his 80s, and if I remember correctly, he was 84, and he was wounded by killing a huge flying reptile, and he died from the wounds, but he did kill the dragon. He killed lots of dragons and a lot of people. He was their hero because he was saving the people as he was killing these dragons that were killing people. The other thing is the word Grendel is one of those words, I just told you it's probably a T-Rex from the description. Do you know if you go to Europe, you can still find all sorts of places that are named for it? In Germany, there's Grendelwald, which means Grendel's wood. If you go to Great Britain, there's Grendelmere, which is Grendel's swamp. There are still all sorts of places that are named for these dinosaurs. The problem is we don't know the names, so we don't associate them with what they're actually describing, which is pretty cool when you think about it. Okay, just a few more. This is a 1515 woodcut. Notice the guy is actually killing a dragon. Here's one from, the Pilgrims were already here by this time. Actually, when the Pilgrims were over here, there was a guy named Baptista that over in Bologna, Italy, a small dinosaur made the mistake of hissing at the guy's oxen. So he took a stick, smacked it over the head and killed it. The local museum took it, they stuffed it, they put it into their museum, and it was there until the Second World War when it was blown up. These things have been around recently. They haven't been gone that long. Now, you're supposed to ask the question, so what do the evolutionists do with all this information? No kidding, I have seen quotes that they say that it is a evolutionary remembrance that we have of a time gone by. Show me some science that backs that one up, please. I really want to see the science on that. Anyway, Webster's Dictionary, 1828 dictionary, first Webster's Dictionary that was ever published. If you look up dragon, it says a genus of animals, the Draco. They are 4 legs, a cylindrical tail, and membranaceous wings radiating out from fins of a flying fish. He is describing a living creature. I want you to see that. He is literally describing a living animal in the 1828. In the 1880s, when the Pony Express riders rode the western United States, they reportedly killed what the Indians called a thunderbird. They cut off his clawed wingtip, carried it into Flagstaff. The whole town turned out to see it. Okay, this is what thunderbirds were that they would put on the sides of their teepees and on the canoes, the Alaskans and the Inuit and them. They would put them on the sides of their canoes. There are stories with the American Indians that these things ate people. And so the way they go through great details to how the Native Americans actually waited until they were in their cave and then they smoked them to death because every time they tried to fight them, they kept eating people. There was a place in Ohio on the Ohio River where there was a picture on the side of a cliff of one of these. And when Lewis and Clark went by, they saw it. And it's funny because I spoke someplace once and somebody from Ohio came up to me afterwards and go, yeah, the river eventually eroded it away. And so the town paid to have it put back up there. Somebody went back and, because it was a historical marker.
Is it Mothman or something?
I'm sorry?
Mothman?
No, it's a pterosaur. It's actually a pterosaur. But the interesting part is that when the caves did still exist, the Indian guide told them there's people up there that died. This thing eats people. And when they went up and looked in the cave, they found a bunch of human remains where this thing was going in and eating people. So we're really blessed that these things don't exist anymore. I mean, honestly. But there's a lot of stories. And then the Loch Ness Monster. Guys, these are just a family of plesiosaurs. And they're not just in Loch Ness. The reason we see them in Loch Ness so many times is they finally put a road along Loch Ness, and so then they got a whole bunch more sightings because more people were driving along the loch. But these things are plesiosaurs, and they live in cold, deep water, thank you, Jesus. And they're not just there. They're in British Columbia. They have Ogopogo. If you go up to Lake Champlain in Vermont, they have champ. I've seen.
They come up and breathe?
Oh yeah, these are reptiles. Reptiles don't have gills, they breathe air.
So you believe Loch Ness is real?
Oh, there's a bunch of them. It's not just one critter.
way.
Oh, it's not just one critter. And like I said, I had a blast writing about the river monsters and the ocean monsters, and I'm gonna have to get you a copy. I'll just lend it to you.
Let me just clarify. You believe that Loch Ness is one of many, or
Oh,
you
yeah.
think Loch Ness is made
No, the
up?
Loch Ness Monster is one of many plesiosaurs that live in cold,
There you go.
deep water. When I spoke in Alaska, they all go, oh yeah, we have the Lake Iliamna Monster. You go over to Japan, oh yeah, we have Izzy. There are these plesiosaurs in a lot of places still. But like I said, they like cold, deep water. Thank you, Jesus. So they're not here. A missionary went to Australia. The people told them, don't go near that lake. I think it was Lake Galilee. They said, don't go near that lake. If you go near that lake, the Yaru will get you. And the missionaries go, what's a Yaru? And so the Aboriginals drew that picture, and they said, the Yaru ate a maiden. I showed this picture for years, and I never noticed this, and my students told me, look, Mrs. Frades, the lady's in its stomach. And if you look here, you can see the maiden that it ate, which I thought was wow. But the point is, there were these plesiosaurs in places in Australia too. And what happens is they get caught. Now, if I were you, I would question, well, if the Loch Ness Monster exists, why haven't we got evidence for its
I want to
existence?
see a picture.
I'm going there. The reason you don't see pictures of it, because MIT actually sent people to try to get pictures. Loch Ness is between two mountain ranges, and the rain washes all that down into the loch, and so the visibility is like not even this far.
But when you see its head,
So, no, because they go deep, and these are really deep, lochs are very deep. They call them bottomless, because anything over several hundred feet, they usually call bottomless. MIT put cameras down there with strobe lights with movement sensors, and they actually got a picture of two 6-foot flippers going by.
no way.
No way, okay? So there are certain evidences to that, but it's not just in Loch Ness. They're all over the place. Like I said, there's the Lake Iliamna Monster. And when I did my book, there's actually judges and stuff that see these things in the ocean, and then they don't tell anybody because they don't want everybody laughing at them. I mean, there's just all sorts of sightings that you'd be surprised, especially before they had motorized vessels in the ocean. When they used to use sailing vessels, they used to see them all the time. Once they've got motorized vessels, then these animals seem to stay away from the paths that the boats use because they hear them coming.
I'm taking the canoe out.
Yes.
I have to say, I mean, you definitely have that open mind to it, because they say that the deepest oceans, we have no idea what's down there.
Absolutely.
Because we don't have the technology.
Yes.
To actually go in, so who's,
Right.
I mean.
Oh yeah, the oceans are still the
we have
unexplored.
No idea.
Absolutely.
We're finding new species, like.
Oh yeah, all the time. Absolutely.
Didn't we just discover the world's largest cave?
Oh, I didn't hear about that one.
Recently, like the past 50 years.
Yes. Well, the point is we're still discovering all sorts of things. This is why I have trouble changing my Bible to fit man's knowledge, because we don't know squat compared to God. So you'll have to forgive my prejudice, and I'm very prejudiced. My prejudice that the Bible is true. This, in Australia, this one guy found a bone. He asked the Aborigine, what does this bone belong to? And the guy says, that's a Geelong bunyip bone. He's like, what's a Geelong bunyip? He drew that. That's an allosaur. There are certain upright walking theropods that looks like, And they have been in Australia up until the 1950s. The cattlemen say that these things are out there killing their cows and stuff. So there are some still around in some places. But they're not here because they'd be roadkill, let's be honest. Okay, but that's a picture, a cave drawing of a mammoth. Can you see its bump is up farther than a regular elephant, which would be back farther on its head? So this is why I can say it's a mammoth. And that's a cave drawing. Can everybody see it? Okay, that's a cave drawing of a mammoth. There's a picture of a living mammoth. He's in Nepal. He's hiding. Now, why am I showing you that? To tell you that if there's still mammoths hiding in certain places, there are probably still dinosaurs hiding in certain places. And one of the places we know there have been a lot of sightings is in the Congolese rainforest in the Ichthyosaur swamp, which is a swamp the size of the state of Alabama. There is Mokele Momembe. And Mokele Momembe, there have been all sorts of sightings with the native peoples, but the University of Chicago spent $250,000 sending Roy Mackel over there to get evidence to its existence or not. And it's a group of Brontosaurus-type dinosaurs that still live in there. Do any of you know what the most dangerous animal in Africa is? That the Africans will tell you what the most dangerous animal is? The hippo. Thank you. Very good. The hippo will snap a crocodile in half. The hippo. And do you know what they know about Mokele Momembe? That it is badder, excuse my English, it is badder than the hippos because wherever Mokele Momembe lives, all the hippos leave. And I found that to be very interesting information when you think about it. So, and also somebody ate one of these once when they found one dead, and then the guy died, so they decided maybe they were poisonous and not to eat anymore, which I found rather interesting also. Mokele Momembe, when they sent the guy, the one group of guys went and tried to take a picture of it, and the lens cap was still on their camera. So when they got back, the guy drew this picture to show them what he saw, and he was comparing it to what the natives look like. So that's what that picture is.
Where did you say they are?
That is in the Congolese rainforest in the Ichthyosaur swamp in Africa. Now these are more recent and they're not on some of my older stuff, so I just wanted to tell you, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but this is an island off of New Zealand, and it's spelled A-M-G-U, now I got that wrong, Mbungi. A-M-B-U-N-G-I. I'm not sure how you say that. Mbungi? Maybe? But on this island of Mbungi, they've only had people on the island since the 1920s. So until then, there were no people living on these islands. Since in the last 20 years, there have been several sightings of dinosaurs. And what is interesting about it is several different people have sighted them. Some of them are in the water when they're sighted, and this one swam into a cave. Some of them have been seen eating on land, eating... no, these are drawings from the people that live on these islands are what you would think of as Aboriginal people like in Papua New Guinea and places like that. And so these people don't have any technology whatsoever. So these are, artists have gone and interviewed them and drew them and tried to get them as close as they can to what the people say they look like. But what's interesting is you can get actual colors, like this one that was found in the garden was supposed to be brown over the top and white underneath, which actually within zoology is called counter shading, which is used on a lot, God used it on a lot of animals that are in the water, because when you look down on them, they blend in, and when you look up, they blend in with the sunlight, and so that's what counter shading is, kind of like an orca. Okay, and so this has got counter shading, and there were multiple people that saw this, because when the one lady saw it, she ran back and got her husband and a few other people to come back, and it was still there, and then when it saw them, it left. Okay, so these are in the last 20 years. They also saw one, and they noticed several of them had what they call dermal frills, which are these along the back are dermal frills. We have never seen that in the fossil record, and therefore nobody's ever drawn it that way. So these people aren't just coming up with this, they're telling you what they really saw, and it's different than what we see in the fossil record. And there's a lot more recent ones, I just want you to know that. What it gets down to is this. Jurassic Park is this idea that Jurassic Park is that everything evolved, that the dinosaurs ruled the earth about 100 million years ago, and about 65 million years ago, they said some horrible event occurred that caused the dinosaurs to become extinct. Some people will tell you that it was because an asteroid hit the planet, causing ash and aerosols to go all over the planet, and causing an ice age to form, and that's what, the water involvement killed the dinosaurs. So in other words, when they look at the fossil record, they see the flood. They see the ice age. They just misinterpret when they actually happened. because they're looking at the rocks, but they're interpreting them through evolution. If you know what I've just told you, then you can explain to people, sure, I believe in dinosaurs. Let me tell you a little more about dinosaurs. And did you know that the only ones that survived the flood were the ones that got on the ark? And only 8 people survived the flood because they're the ones that trusted God and got on the ark and got off of the ark. And then you should be able to share the gospel message with them and say, there's going to be another judgment in the future. It's going to be by fire. And if you don't get into the ark that God provided, you're going to die. And the ark, his name is Jesus. Let me tell you about my Jesus. And so then dinosaurs become the missionary lizards they should be, right? We should be able to share Jesus with people through dinosaurs and everything else. All right, so I just was trying, there's so much more. I mean, we could just spend hours and hours on any one of these subjects. I want you to know that. But I just wanted to give you an idea of the evidence that's out there and how this might fit together. But I'm definitely not telling you everything there is to know about that. So please write down these websites, and these are ongoing places where you can go and grab great information. They have magazines. Answers in Genesis has Answers magazine. They've got a kids section in it. It's great. Creation Ministries International also has Creation magazine, which is also a great resource. So there are lots of great resources that you can find. Okay? And what questions do you have? Let me have your questions. I know we answered a few of them as we went along.
It sounds silly, but I've always told, I thought dinosaurs were just history. And I've always told my daughter she was scared of lizards. And I've always said they're like baby dinosaurs. So they're really not.
Nope. And now you got the right information. And that's good. Christians have been afraid of radiometric dating, dinosaurs, so many things because we don't know how they fit in. And so that's all I've tried to do for you today. I've tried to help you fit things into your Bible. From here, you can go get more information.
Right.
But I've tried to give you the big picture so you know how things could fit in.